The Arabian Sea is large enough to disappear in. It is not large enough to hide from a P-8A Poseidon. At 3:41 a.m., a United States Navy P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft had been on station in the central Arabian Sea for 6 hours and 22 minutes, executing a systematic grid search of the northern sector on a collection tasking that had been generated from satellite imagery intelligence suggesting elevated Iranian naval activity in the approaches to the Gulf of Oman. The P-8A was at 22,000 feet, its radar systems sweeping the surface below in the specific, methodical way of a platform whose entire purpose was to build a comprehensive picture of everything that moved on or near the water within its sensor radius. The crew had been cataloging contacts since their arrival on station: dhows, container vessels, an Indian Navy patrol craft on a southbound track, 2 Iranian fishing boats operating in loose proximity on the eastern sector. All characterized, all logged, all filed in the mission's running track picture. At 3:41 a.m., the sensor operator on the surface radar console flagged a contact that the track picture's automated algorithm had placed in the warship category 40 seconds earlier, but had not yet transmitted for human review. The contact was at 187 nautical miles northeast, bearing 027, speed 28 knots, heading 225. At 28 knots and heading 225, it would close the P-8A's current orbit position in approximately 4 hours if both maintained their courses, a timeline that made it a monitoring item rather than an immediate tactical concern. What made the sensor operator flag it for immediate attention was not the contact's speed or heading. It was the radar cross-section and the propulsion signature. The contact's return size was consistent with a warship in the 1,400 to 1,800 ton displacement range, a frigate, not a patrol craft, not a logistics vessel. And the thermal return from its hull was showing the specific heat distribution pattern of a gas turbine plant running at high output rather than the diesel signature of a vessel on routine transit speed. A frigate running its gas turbines at 28 knots at 3:41 a.m. in the central Arabian Sea was not on a routine transit. Pilots, Sensor 1. Surface contact bearing 027, 187 nautical miles. Warship category, size consistent with frigate. Gas turbine at high output. Assess Iranian Navy. Contact is heading toward our current position. The aircraft commander processed the report against the pre-mission intelligence package. The Iranian Navy had 3 Alvand-class frigates assessed as operational in the Arabian Sea theater, a class of ship that the intelligence file characterized as capable of 30-plus knots on gas turbine power, equipped with a C-802 anti-ship missile battery, a 76mm deck gun, and a surface search radar suite that could acquire a large aircraft at medium altitude at ranges of approximately 120 nautical miles. The contact's bearing, speed, and heading were consistent with a deliberate intercept vector toward the P-8A's patrol orbit. At 187 nautical miles, the frigate was well outside its radar acquisition range for an aircraft target, which meant it had acquired the P-8A's position from a source other than its own sensors. Either it was being cued by shore-based radar coverage from the Iranian coast, or it had intercepted the P-8A's own radar emissions and was homing on the aircraft's electronic signature, or it had been provided the P-8A's patrol orbit coordinates through a command and control channel before it left port. 3 possible explanations. All 3 produce the same operational implication. The frigate knew where the P-8A was, and it was moving toward that location at 28 knots. The aircraft commander transmitted to 5th Fleet at 3:42 a.m. and reported the contact, its characteristics, and his assessment that the frigate was on a deliberate intercept vector. He continued the patrol orbit. Departing the patrol area at the first indication of an intercept was not the operational posture that the pre-mission order required, and the contact was 4 hours away at current rates. Sufficient time for the situation to resolve itself through command guidance, tactical repositioning, or the frigate altering its heading for reasons unrelated to the P-8A's presence. The contact altered its heading at 3:44 a.m., not away from the P-8A. Toward it, with a 2-degree course correction that refined the intercept vector and reduced the time to closest approach from 4 hours to 3 hours and 49 minutes. A 2-degree course correction at 187 nautical miles that refined an intercept vector was a navigation adjustment made by a crew that had a current position fix on the target it was intercepting and was maintaining precision on the approach. The contact had updated targeting data. Something was feeding at the P-8A's position in near real time. The aircraft commander requested the signals intelligence support of the P-8A's own onboard electronic warfare system at 3:44 a.m. The EW suite began a systematic sweep of the frequency bands associated with Iranian maritime command and control communications and shore-based radar coverage systems. The sweep would not be instantaneous. The identification and characterization of specific signals in a crowded maritime electromagnetic environment at 3:41 a.m. required the collection time that the mission still had available. But the question of how the frigate was being cued was an intelligence question that the crew could work in parallel with the tactical picture's development. 5th Fleet's response to the 3:42 a.m. report arrived at 3:48 a.m. The commanding officer of 5th Fleet's on-watch staff directed the P-8A to continue the patrol orbit, to expand the collection aperture to include the Iranian frigate as a primary surveillance target, and to transmit all track data on the frigate in real time to the Joint Operations Center at Bahrain. 5th Fleet was simultaneously tasking an update from the strike group operating 200 nautical miles south on the availability of surface and air assets for support if the tactical situation developed in a direction that required a response. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer was detached from the strike group at 3:51 a.m. on a northeasterly heading toward the P-8A's operating area. Its transit at maximum speed would place it in communications range and, if necessary, in defensive support range of the P-8A's patrol orbit in approximately 1 hour and 40 minutes. 1 hour and 40 minutes. The frigate was still closing. At 3:55 a.m., the P-8A's EW suite resolved the queuing architecture. The shore-based component was a coastal surveillance radar on the Iranian coast near Chabahar, a fixed installation that the intelligence file had assessed as an over-the-horizon radar system capable of tracking surface contacts and low-altitude aircraft at extended ranges in the northern Arabian Sea. The radar was transmitting on frequencies that the EW suite characterized with confidence as a specific OTH system type that had been documented in previous collection operations. Its emissions were being relayed to the frigate on a naval command and control frequency that the EW suite detected and characterized as an encrypted data channel consistent with Iranian Navy fleet communication protocols. The frigate was receiving continuous position updates on the P-8A from the Chabahar OTH radar through an encrypted relay to the ship's command system. The relay was not being broken by the P-8A's own collection. Encryption meant the content could not be read. Only the fact of the transmission could be documented. But the architecture was clear. Shore-based radar, encrypted relay, ship receiver. A network designed specifically for tracking aircraft at extended range and providing guidance to intercept platforms. The P-8A's aircraft commander reported the queuing architecture to 5th Fleet at 3:56 a.m. He also reported a change in the frigate's behavior that had developed in the preceding 3 minutes. The contact had increased speed. The surface radar picture showed the frigate now at 32 knots, maximum gas turbine output for this class, and the intercept geometry had updated. The frigate was at 161 nautical miles, closing at 32 knots, and the time to closest approach had compressed to 2 hours and 51 minutes. The frigate was committed. Whatever calculation its commanding officer had been running since 3:41 a.m. had resolved in favor of maximum speed. At 4:03 a.m., the P-8A's acoustic systems operator, whose primary mission function was sonobuoy management for subsurface contact classification, called the aircraft commander with an observation that had not come from the acoustic systems. He had been monitoring the VHF and UHF radio bands on the secondary receiver that the crew kept active as an ambient intelligence collection tool throughout their missions. At 4:02 a.m. and 33 seconds, he had detected a brief radio transmission on a frequency that the signals database associated with Iranian Navy intership communications. The transmission had been short, under 4 seconds, and had come from a bearing consistent with the frigate's current position. It had also come simultaneously from a bearing consistent with a position approximately 43 nautical miles northwest of the frigate's current track, a position in open water that contained no contact on the P-8A's surface radar picture. 2 transmissions, same frequency, same 4-second window, different bearings. The aircraft commander had the sensor operator expand the surface radar search sector to the northwest bearing at maximum gain at 4:04 a.m. The expanded search resolved a contact that the standard radar setting had not been prioritizing. A smaller return, lower speed, no thermal signature above the sea surface return. A vessel running cold on diesel power, sitting nearly stationary at 43 nautical miles northwest of the frigate. Not a fishing boat. The radar cross-section was wrong for a fishing boat. It was in the patrol craft category, small, fast, and specifically positioned at the bearing from which a second surface contact would approach the P-8A's orbit from a different direction than the frigate was approaching from. 2-element surface intercept geometry. The frigate closing from the northeast at 32 knots, the patrol craft holding position to the northwest. Both on approach vectors to the P-8A's orbit. The frigate visible and fast, consuming attention and response resources. The patrol craft quiet and still, waiting for the geometry to develop. The aircraft commander made a transmission to 5th Fleet at 4:05 a.m. that was measured in its language and unambiguous in its operational content. 5th Fleet, Sea Hunter 5. Second contact assessed as coordinated surface element, bearing 301 from current position, 43 nautical miles. Assess 2-element intercept architecture, frigate as primary attention asset, patrol craft as secondary closing element. Request immediate air support and authorization to employ defensive systems if closure exceeds safe separation thresholds. 5th Fleet's response came at 4:09 a.m. The authorization was specific and conditional. The P-8A was authorized to employ electronic countermeasures and to alter its patrol profile as tactically necessary to maintain safe separation from both contacts. It was not authorized to employ weapons. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets from the strike group were being launched on a defensive support tasking and would reach the P-8A's operating area in approximately 51 minutes. The destroyer was at 1 hour and 37 minutes. 51 minutes for the F/A-18Fs. The frigate was at 148 nautical miles and still closing at 32 knots. At 32 knots, the frigate would reach 80 nautical miles, the range at which its surface search radar was assessed capable of achieving a reliable track on the P-8A, in approximately 1 hour and 46 minutes. The FA-18Fs would arrive 55 minutes before the frigate reached radar acquisition range. The patrol craft to the northwest was the variable the timeline didn't address cleanly. It had been stationary since the P-8A's radar first resolved it. A stationary contact in a 2-element intercept architecture was either waiting for a trigger or maintaining its position for a purpose the surface radar picture didn't fully reveal. The aircraft commander ordered the sensor operator to maintain continuous high-priority track on both contacts and to flag any change in the patrol craft's behavior immediately. At 4:14 a.m., the patrol craft began to move, not toward the P-8A. South. The contact accelerated from near stationary to approximately 22 knots on a southerly heading that was taking it away from the P-8A's orbit toward the P-8A's southwest, a bearing that placed it below and behind the aircraft's current track. The movement was purposeful, and its bearing was geometrically specific. It was repositioning to a location that, if the P-8A continued its current orbit pattern, would place the patrol craft in the P-8A's flight path on the orbit's southern leg at approximately 15 nautical miles range, a range that was well inside the effective employment range of shoulder-fired or deck-mounted surface-to-air weapons. 15 nautical miles. The patrol craft was repositioning for a low-altitude firing position against an aircraft orbit it had presumably been briefed on in advance. The aircraft commander departed the standard orbit pattern at 4:14 a.m. and 32 seconds, climbing to 28,000 feet and executing a course change that took the P-8A northeast, away from the patrol craft's repositioning vector toward the bearing of the F/A-18Fs that were now 41 minutes out. The orbit that the patrol craft had been preparing to intercept was vacated before the patrol craft reached its intended firing position. The patrol craft altered its heading at 4:15 a.m. and 9 seconds. It tracked the P-8A's course change with a 37-second delay, slower than the frigate's 11-second Q response, consistent with a crew that was receiving updated position data through a relay chain rather than through direct sensor contact. The patrol craft was not seeing the P-8A itself. It was receiving position data from the same Chabahar OTH network that was queuing the frigate, and the relay had a latency that the 37-second response time quantified precisely. The P-8A's aircraft commander reported the 37-second relay latency to Fifth Fleet at 4:16 a.m. Another number. Another parameter of the Iranian maritime tracking network documented in real time by the aircraft the network was trying to intercept. At 4:19 a.m., the frigate's surface search radar activated. It was at 129 nautical miles, outside the assessed acquisition range for a target in the P-8A's altitude and radar cross-section category, but within the range at which a high-power surface search radar operating in its maximum gain mode might achieve intermittent contact on a large aircraft at high altitude under favorable propagation conditions. The EW suite characterized the emission as a CODAR-type surface search radar in its long-range surveillance mode. Full power, extended pulse, optimized for maximum detection range rather than surface clutter rejection. The frigate was not yet tracking the P-8A. It was searching. The fact that it activated at 129 nautical miles suggested that the shore-based OTH queuing system had given the crew a position accurate enough to justify activating their own radar in expectation of achieving acquisition before the standard 120 nautical mile threshold. The P-8A's EW suite activated its decoy management system at 4:19 a.m. Not chaff. The frigate's radar was in search mode rather than tracking mode, and chaff against a search mode radar provided no tactical benefit. The decoy system activated its electronic deception mode, injecting a low-power false return into the P-8A's own electromagnetic signature in a way that was designed to create an ambiguous radar picture for a receiver attempting to distinguish the aircraft from the background noise at extended range. The technique did not make the aircraft invisible. It made the aircraft's precise position less certain to a receiver working at the edge of its effective range. The frigate's search radar swept for 11 minutes without achieving a characterized track on the P-8A. The P-8A's EW suite monitored the frigate's emission throughout, noting each sweep's characteristics and building a technical profile that documented the radar's operating parameters under operational conditions. At 4:22 a.m., the F/A-18F section checked in on the tactical net. The lead pilot transmitted the section's position, altitude, and estimated arrival. 29 minutes out, the patrol craft had repositioned again. It had not achieved its intended firing position geometry on the original orbit, and had now settled onto a holding track at 28 nautical miles southwest of the P-8A's current position. Outside effective man-portable SAM range for the altitude the P-8A was maintaining, but inside the effective range of a deck-mounted short-range missile system if one was installed on the patrol craft's afterdeck. The intelligence file on patrol craft of this general class did not include a definitive assessment of their deck weapons configuration. The uncertainty was noted and transmitted to 5th Fleet. At 4:31 a.m., the FA-18Fs reached the P-8A's operating area and checked in visually, the lead aircraft positioning off the P-8A's right wing in the specific, deliberate formation that communicated to any surface platform observing the situation that the Maritime Patrol aircraft was no longer operating alone. The wing aircraft positioned aft of the P-8A on the port side, covering the southern approach bearing where the patrol craft was holding. The frigate was at 98 nautical miles, still closing, its search radar still active. The F/A-18F flight lead transmitted on the International Maritime Distress Frequency, Channel 16, at 4:32 a.m., directing all unidentified naval vessels in the P-8A's operating sector to identify themselves, state their intentions, and maintain a minimum safe separation of 50 nautical miles from the United States Navy aircraft. The transmission was made in English and Farsi. The frigate did not respond. The patrol craft altered its heading at 4:33 a.m. Northeast, away from its holding position, away from the P-8A's track at 26 knots on a bearing that was taking it back toward the Iranian coast. It did not respond to the Channel 16 broadcast. It did not transmit on any monitored frequency. It simply turned and accelerated toward the coast at a rate that would place it in Iranian territorial waters in approximately 47 minutes. The frigate held its course for 19 more minutes. Its search radar continued sweeping. It never achieved a characterized track on the P-8A according to the EW Suite's assessment. The electronic deception system had maintained sufficient ambiguity in the aircraft's signature at the frigate's operating range to prevent a confirmed track establishment. At 4:52 a.m., the frigate reduced speed from 32 knots to 18 knots. At 4:54 a.m., it altered course northeast onto a heading that was not an intercept vector for the P-8A's current position or any projected position based on the patrol orbit geometry. The frigate was no longer closing. The total engagement duration from the sensor operator's initial flag at 3:41 a.m. to the frigate's course change at 4:54 a.m. was 1 hour and 13 minutes. During those 73 minutes, the P-8A had collected a complete operational profile of an Iranian Navy coordinated maritime intercept operation, an operation that had demonstrated capabilities, doctrinal concepts, and tactical limitations that the pre-mission intelligence package had not characterized at this level of specificity. The debrief at Bahrain began at 8:15 a.m. The intelligence findings were organized in descending order of novelty. The most novel finding was the two-element architecture. An Alvand-class frigate operating as the visible, attention-consuming primary intercept element, while a patrol craft maneuvered for a firing position on the aircraft's standard orbit pattern, was a coordinated concept that had not been documented in previous Iranian Navy maritime intercept operations. The architecture required pre-mission coordination between the frigate and the patrol craft, a shared understanding of the aircraft's orbit pattern, and a communication relay capable of providing both platforms with updated position data at sufficient fidelity to execute coordinated approach vectors from separated positions. The second finding was the OTH radar relay latency. The 37-second interval between the P-8A's course change and the patrol craft's response had quantified the command and control relay time for the Chabahar shore station to process the updated position, encode it, and transmit it to the patrol craft. 37 seconds was operationally significant. It meant that an aircraft making course changes at intervals shorter than 37 seconds was maneuvering faster than the Iranian queuing network could update the intercept platform's navigation picture. A 40-second interval between course changes was, in effect, outside the network's ability to provide real-time tracking guidance to subordinate intercept platforms. The third finding was the frigate's search radar performance at 129 nautical miles. It had activated early, had swept for 11 minutes without achieving a confirmed track, and had ceased without achieving acquisition. The electronic deception system's effectiveness at the edge of the radar's acquisition range was documented as operationally validated under live conditions, a validation that had not been achievable in exercise environments where the electronic environment was controlled and the collection geometry was known in advance. 3 findings, each one an improvement to the operational planning picture for P-8A missions in the northern Arabian Sea. Each one available because an Iranian frigate commander had executed a prepared intercept plan at maximum speed in the pre-dawn hours, and had done so completely enough that every element of the plan's architecture had been forced to reveal itself. The aircraft commander completed his portion of the debrief at 10:30 a.m. and signed the accuracy confirmation on the intelligence annex. He had been in the aircraft for 11 hours and 14 minutes. He had not fired a weapon. He had not been struck. He had collected 73 minutes of operational intelligence on an adversary's maritime intercept doctrine and had transmitted it in real time to the command centers that would incorporate it into the planning picture before the next mission launched. The Arabian Sea does not keep records. The mission recorder does. The intelligence archive does. The people who fly these missions at 3:41 a.m. with their radar systems running and their collection systems active, they carry the record in the debriefs they produce and the planning updates those debriefs generate, year after year, mission after mission, in the specific and unglamorous work of understanding what is in the water below and what that means for everyone whose job requires them to be above it. The sea was still running when the debrief ended. It was still running when the next mission launched. The collection continues. That is, in the end, the answer to everything that comes up to meet it.